Hey, what's up? Welcome back. In this episode, we're going to talk about this question here from Seth Davis. This is in regards to a Remix demo. So we built a Remix run demo to accept a payment with Stripe. And Seth asks, cool tutorial, but the payment intent is always 20 bucks. How can we make it so that we can pass a dynamic value or some other value into the create payment intent function? And so what I wanted to do is just like quickly update this demo. And so if we take a look at how it looks right now, if we look at like localhost 3000, right now it just says buy a book. You click on buy a book and it brings you through this payment flow with the payment element. And it always charges you $20. And that's because the way that we've built it is when we accept a payment, this create payment intent function that's happening on the server is always hard coding $20. So we want to talk about how can we actually accept some dynamic sort of amount here. So maybe we can start taking in some amount, and then we want this to either be maybe like amount or $20 if we don't have any amount passed in. And so what I think makes the most sense is taking a look at our routes and on the index page, adding a form so that we can input some dynamic value here that will be then used as the amount that we charge someone. And you could obviously like swap that out and change the amount based on if they're buying different products or whatever. But in this case, maybe we'll just give an example of like how you might donate. So you're kind of like choosing the amount to pay. Similar example might be like pay what you want example. But this should give the added context for how you might pass stuff down. And so the first thing to think about is like, where are we actually calling that create payment intent function? And it's in this pay index where we're mounting the payment element. I'm sorry, it's happening the layer above. So in the pay route, when we go to this like buy a book page and we hit the pay route, we land on this page. Right when we land on that page, we're calling use loader data. And that happens just as part of the get request for the page. Remix is going to execute this function server side. And so this loader function is going to call create payment intent. This is the one that this is the function that we just updated inside of payments TS that now will accept in an amount. And so what we can do here is now we can sort of pass in some amount. But where does that actually come from? Well, in the case of standard web applications, often it's common to sort of maintain or manage your state either in the path or in a query string. This is going like way back to old school standard like web standards. And so what I want to do is on this pay page, I'm going to add question mark or like, a query string with amount equals and then some value. And this amount is going to be how much we want to charge. If there's no amount passed, then we'll just default. And so here what we can do is inside of the loader, we have access to a couple different things. So we have access to params and we have access to the request. So let's just log those out real quick. Console.log params. Let's actually do it like this. Params, same thing for request, so that we can see what's coming out. So now when we load this page, we can see the params are empty and the request is here. So we can see the full request. One thing that you'll notice is that the params that compose this sort of object here that's passed into the loader, those are from just the path params. So that would be if we had something like path or like pay/1234 and our routes were set up with a dynamic segment in the path that would capture this param and pass it through. Instead, if we want to work with query string params, instead of using params, we want to use the request body, and we're going to use the URL, and we'll just pull out the query string parameter using search params. So here we're going to just say const URL is a new URL from the request.url. That's going to construct a new URL instance. Now we could get like the raw amount, and we can do that from something like url.search_params.get amount, I believe. And now let's just console.log the raw amount. And so if we refresh this page, now we can see down at the bottom, we see the raw amount is 1234. Okay. But that's actually coming out as like a string. So if I do this little trick again, we'll see that this comes out as a string of 1, 2, 3, 4. What we want to pass to the Stripe API is an integer that represents the lowest denomination. In this case, we're using USD, so we want to pass an integer value. So this 1, 2, 3, 4 would be $12.34. And so I want to probably accept decimal values in the form over here, and then we'll pass that down. So in reality, this would probably be something more like pay12.34 as a string, and then inside of this loader, what we can do is a little bit of like input manipulation. So we'll say const amount is going to be like parse float of the raw amount, and then we want to multiply that by 100. And if for some reason that comes back as something with a decimal still, we'll parse int, and we should get back 1, 2, 3, 4. So now if we console.log amount, we should get something nice and clean. So let's refresh the page here, and now we see the amount is 1, 2, 3, 4, and that is $12.34. So that's exactly what we should charge. Okay, so now we're passing that down to our create payment intent function, and that should actually be creating a payment intent with that amount. So let's actually just pay for this payment intent, pay, and what do we get back? Okay, so we did collect $12.34 successfully, so that's cool. So let's go back and figure out how we're gonna actually make it so that when we go to this page, we can have a dynamic amount instead of just having to edit the query string. So if we look again at sort of just like raw web standards, if you add a form tag with no method post, the default method is a get request. So we're going to use the same action, which is /pay. So that's the route that we want to go to. We don't need to specify a method because we want to use a get request. Then we can use an input of type number. Let's even give it a step of 0.1, so it's sort of like dollars or whatever. And then we want to give this a name of amount. This name here is what will appear in the query string on the next view. Let's also give this sort of a label, amount. We'll wrap the whole thing. There's a whole bunch of different ways to do this. This is not like perfectly accessible in any way, but hopefully this gives you the tools you need to like actually get this working. So now we'll just say donate or something as a button inside of our form. So now if we refresh, we see this amount input here, and maybe we do $45.90 and click on donate. That's going to redirect us to this pay route with the amount, like this form data from the previous page is in the query string, because this is a get request to this pay action, and all of the named sort of inputs from our form are going to appear in the query string. Now we can enter in sort of our card details here and click pay. And now we have sort of a dynamic form that's loading up and paying what we want. So the trick here is that we're kind of just depending on this query string, but in reality, you may want to do this a little bit differently. Like there's a few different ways to do this, but like this, I think, is the simplest way to modify the sample so that it works using just these web standards that that Remix really depends on. And the alternative would be that you would have to like sort of maybe create a route similar to our webhooks route that would have an action, and that would allow you to use the fetch API inside of your controller or inside of your your page component or your route component, so that it would hit that API route, get back some JSON, use that to create a payment intent, and then like after you have a new payment intent, then load the elements stuff. But I think this is much cleaner, just depending on the existing web standards and using the query string. So hopefully that helps. Thanks so much for the question, and yeah, otherwise we'll see you in the next one.